Well, good morning and welcome to Zen Fits. I discovered I don't have my marker with me, so we'll just have to go without that. Yesterday, we were talking about waiting for Dr. I put up Zen, waiting for Dr. Zen, or having no future. And we talked about the movement of an evolving life that goes from noise to silence, movement to stillness, future to now, thought to awareness, the part to the whole. And I wanted to add the movement to the source, to find the source, like the explorers searched for the headwaters of the great river. There was like great discoveries of the headwaters of the Nile, you know, and the Ganges. In India, the headwaters of the Ganges is a sacred place. It's the head of Shiva, where the great river of life comes out of his head and flows down him like a mountain going to the ocean. So it's a very sacred place, the headwaters of the river of life. And you could even say in the Bible, in Genesis, that the tree of life, locked away in the garden, is like the headwaters of the river of life. And we're in the Bible's view, we're in exile. We can't find our way back into the garden because of the sin of judgment, the sin of dividing the world into good and bad, you see. That put us into exile. And so we are in exile looking for the source, looking for our lost unity with the world and the Father. So I wanted to talk about the Father today. Last night at dinner, I was talking about my trip down to Jacksonville and my sister's home, where in a couple of talks ago I talked about this, where she had archived, after my mother died, she got found all the letters that she and my father had written during before the war and during World War II, and had put them all in sequence. And so I spent a couple of hours reading these, and it was quite a revelation to me of the other side of the story that I didn't know as a child growing up. All children don't know the whole story. So I was kind of like, I've been a little bit full of this father thing now. He died in 1998 after he had a stroke, so the last 8 years of his life. So he was in good health, but he just couldn't make choices, and he forgot all of his long-term memory. All of his memories of his life were gone, pretty much. But anyway, so I thought about this last night, and I was talking to some friends, and so I said I was very thankful for the gift my father had given me, and what was that? And I said, his pain. What? Yes, the oyster thanks the grain of sand, because without the grain of sand, there is no pearl of wisdom. So, and I also thought of the happy fault. I think that was in one of the Christian hymns. The cross was the happy fault. So I kind of like looked at my father like, you know, as the happy fault, as the rub, the grain of sand that drove me to evolve in search of the lost father or the source. Now, the Father is we have to understand this idea because it's also used in religion. God is the Father. And the son or the daughter have a father. So the father-son relationship has many levels. And the lower level, which is our physical relationship, is a metaphor for the higher level. So it's all really one, you see. So that's why, you know, so Father God and my Father are really mythologically or metaphorically the same. And And the son also is a transgender term. It means both father and daughter and son. So it's not just boys. So I wrote up here the happy fault, the sand and the oyster. Okay. And I also, oh, Bernard, I wish I hadn't left my marker. I also call my father the hyphenated father. Now what I discovered, or what I remember, what I really realized after reading these letters, because they were all, they wrote all the time, that's all they had. It was, you know, like a trucker's marriage. You know, my father was graduated in 1929, and I carried this with me. This was the watch. This was the watch. I need to wind it every day because that's the way time used to be. You have to physically wind your time. But anyway, this was given to him by his grandmother who raised him in Pocatello, Idaho, when he graduated from Annapolis. And I imagine he had this at sea. And I imagine that during all his years at sea, from 1929 until 1949, that's 20 years of sea duty, he was winding and looking at this watch and wondering when he would get home. So that's kind of, I had it restored. So it's perfect, keeps perfect time. And so I call him the hyphenated father because if you look at a hyphen, it goes boop, space, boop, space, boop, space. So these letters were all about the space talking to the hyphen. So they were all about, I was so excited when I got your letters. I got 3 in one day, and then I'll be coming home, and I so long to be at home, and your hair is, I see your hair and the sparkling of the moon on the water, and all of these romantic longing letters, you know, because when they got married in 1935, he had already been in China for 3 years on the Yangtze River. When he got out of Annapolis, he went to China. They put him on these river boats. There were 2 river boats on the Yangtze River that went up and down the Yangtze River protecting European interests there in China. And this was during the time when the communists were beginning to revolt, and the nationalists were having a revolution, and then the communist revolution. It was a very turbulent time. And there was a book and a movie written about this called The Sand Pebbles with Steve Queen. I suggest you get it. It's a beautiful book. And my father said, yes, all those things were true. It was the person who had been there wrote this book, and it was a composite of all the experiences of the boats. And the last boat there was the Pan A, and it was sunk by the Japanese, and that's when the Americans left. But anyway, my father was there for 3 years, and then he came back, and he was on destroyers in the Atlantic. And now in the Atlantic, from 1935, when they got married, until when the war started, was convoys going to England, and the destroyers escorting the convoys to keep the Germans from sinking them. And then the Germans started sinking American destroyers. He was on the Reuben James, and I was reading the letters from him being on the Reuben James. And then he went to the Barry, and right after he went to the Barry, the Reuben James was sunk with all hands. And there was a folk song written about the Reuben James. And so many times he would be on one ship and he would leave it, and it would be in the newspapers it was sunk, and my mother didn't know if he was on it or not, and then there'd be a telegram saying, I'm okay, I'm okay. So anyway, the war started, and my mother remembers when they were there at the beach in Willoughby in Norfolk, and on Sunday morning at a friend's house, and the war and the news came of the Pearl Harbor attack, and my mother said my father got up pale, white as a sheet, stood up white as a sheet, went to his ship, didn't see him again. He was gone. And so that continued all the way to the end of the war. He went to San Diego and amphibious landings and Guadalcanal and all the amphibious landings. We were back and forth. Spent most of my life, in a car going from one coast to the other. My mother had to do all the logistics of finding a house, and there were no places to live. or traveling alone to go to the next port where the ship was going to be in, or having to deal with all of the wartime rationing and everything. And the hyphenated father, he was at sea. And so then when the war ended, did he come home? No. He went in the 7th Fleet and he was over in Japan and the China Sea on guard again in China to protect Western interests during the Communist Revolution. So then finally in 1949 he got shore duty for 4 years in Jersey City, and I stayed in, even there I moved every 4 years they were there. They lived in 2 different towns, so I moved, every 2 years I was moving. And so then, when he retired in 1955, I graduated from high school and went to college. So, that's why I call him the hyphenated father, and the inheritance, the happy fault, was that essentially I had no father. And when he came home, he had no idea what to do with the little boy. I remember in the letters he would talk about, oh, I'm looking so, I want to be home so I can be with my little son Eddie. They call me Eddie. But I have no memories of bonding. I do have the few memories I have of him was when he beat me with a belt for chasing my sister, or slapping me for speaking disrespectful to my mother, or in 9th grade, I was invited to a dance. I had no social skills, and by a little Italian girl in New Jersey, and my father said, "You're not going to any dance with a wop. Go tell her you can't go." So I had to tell the girl I couldn't go, and her sister spit on me. So I never really understand why my father had such angry prejudice, but he was a very prejudiced man. Even to the point when in my 20s, when I was 19 or 20, I think. No, I was married 22. And I'd been married. I went home down to Jacksonville where he retired, and Martin Luther King was marching. And I remember getting into, and I'd been driving all day, getting into an argument about civil rights. And the argument ended with his face right here in front of me, livid, "You'll never make a nigger lover out of me," And so I remember going into the bedroom and falling on the bed and all crying, and all of this hate came up. And I remember it very vividly. It was a green hate. And it just overtook me, And that was a change. After that, I never went home with the expectation that he would be any different than he was. Up until that point, I had the expectation that this time I would find the father, that kind of thing. So my next memories of him were basically vacation memories, because we would go home, and basically going home on a vacation or time, duty visits to the folks, it was always with a watch here, how long, when can we leave? And the last thing he said to me, the last word I had from him before he had a stroke, was at a Thanksgiving dinner, and sister and her sister and her husband and my wife and all around there, and my sister had married a naval officer, and it was kind of like the father's. John was Pop's real son, because he was a naval officer, followed in his footsteps, and on this hat rack at the door was a whole bunch of John's hats, one of which was his naval officer's hat. He was in the reserves. So I was playing around, we were waiting for dinner, and I was putting on some hats, and I put on that officer's hat. My father, sitting there, and so, "Take that off, you don't deserve that hat. You haven't earned that hat." And then the last thing I ever remember, I was cutting the turkey. For some reason, he wasn't cutting it. And he was at the other end of the table. "Don't you know how to cut that turkey?" And so those were really, and then after that, I heard he had a stroke, and that was the end of his anger and any real communication with him. Except one time, the old dad awoke, and we were driving somewhere, and he was in the back seat, and I was hesitant in making a turn, I don't know, and don't you know how to drive? And so the old dad was still there. And but the last word I had from him healed the whole thing. We had taken him to the hospital. It was in 1998 during a snowstorm. He had some bleeding, and see, various complications were happening. He was 94, and I went to the hospital earlier than my mother. I was there, walked in by myself, and when I walked into the room, my father sat up in the bed, saw me come in, and held out his arms to me. And I just rushed over and hugged him, and just, instead of the hate coming out, the love came out. And it was a real, I was one with the Father, and he said into my ear, I'm ready, I want to die. I'm ready to die. And so we brought him home and to hospice, and in about a week or so, Mom told me to spend the night, and she woke me up and said, Pop can't get back in bed. So I went in the bedroom, and he was kneeling up against the bed, and I didn't know if he had fallen and couldn't get back or if he was praying. He had never been very religious. He'd been brought up a Catholic, I think, but I never went to church or anything. And so we got him back into bed, and we stood there, and he began to breathe heavily, and then he sneezed, and then he died. Very peaceful. And so looking back over that whole time, over the years, I have discovered the value of the happy fault. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the father in as a mythic relationship, as an archetypal relationship. Because if the father to the child, you see, the child grows up in the mother's arms. The child and the mother are one. But there comes a time when the child leaves the mother and goes into the world womb, you see. There are two wombs here. There's the womb of childhood, which is identified with the mother. And then there is a greater world. And so now you must go into the greater world as an adult, you see. But that too is a womb. And there is a threshold guardian. There is a guide that that introduces you to the world and gives you the skills and gives you the wisdom and understanding to survive in the greater world, you see. And that is the father. The father is when the child is ready to leave the womb, to leave the world of childhood, the magical world of the Garden of Eden, when he's ready to leave the garden with the mother. You go into the outer world, and you go in kind of like as an exile. Because now where is the garden? The paradise of childhood has been lost, you see. The unity of childhood, the wonder of childhood has been lost. And now you're in exile and you want to restore that unity. So you search for unity. You search for the lost paradise while you're wandering in the world. And the Father has introduced you to that and hopefully given you the skills you need. Or maybe not. But at any point, we all get this, there's sand in the oyster. There's sand in the oyster. Without that grain of sand, it just takes one little grain of sand, the oyster has a rub and an irritant. And so he creates this pearl, trying to get rid of this irritant. And this becomes the pearl of wisdom. That's why we love pearls, you see. So we're all creating a pearl of wisdom because of the rub we have with the world, which sometimes you can say or not say, but I'm saying is the rub I had with the Father, this feeling of being separate and longing to be one with, you see, is transferred to the world. And so we begin to seek our source or seek union with the Father in the world as a union with the world. And even Jesus speaks about this when he says, I and the Father are one. Which is basically saying I and the world are one. I'm in unity. I have unity consciousness with the world, and I have no problem with it. I have no rub with the world. I can love my enemies, you see, because I have no sense of being in exile from the world. So Jesus says, I am before Abraham I was. So that's a Zen koan. Who were you before your parents were born? I was before Abraham, or I was before the Father, you see. So there's this sense of atonement. And even in Joseph Campbell, in his Hero with 1,000 Faces, which he mapped out the journey of the hero, one of the accomplishments of the hero in his journey is atonement with the Father, atonement with the world. Even prisoners, you go to jail because you are at war with the Father. And so there's when there's a atonement means that you've come to terms with the happy fault, and your grievance with the world has been absolved, and you're at one with the world again. In Christianity, this would be being saved, you see. Or in Zen or Buddhism, it's awakening. So there are a lot of different terms for this, but it all really has the same kind of meaning. So this happy fault, without this happy fault, without this rub, there would be no incentive to evolve. There would be no incentive to be human. There would be no incentive to make you want to explore the unknown, to expand understanding, to arrive at resolution, to arrive at the source, to know who you are, to know what your true nature is, to finally answer the questions of your life, to finally restore peace, to finally complete yourself and become whole. You see, all of these ideas here are part of our search, and we're all doing that in our own way, in our own path, at our own stage. So everybody's at some stage, and there is no really, I've discovered, there is no final stage where you say, aha, I finally arrived. Life is always a discovery, always an awakening, always a quest. I think I posted the little poem by T.S. Eliot, where our exploring is always, I can't quote it at all, but at the end of our exploring we come to where we began and know it for the first time. And this is Zen. At first, the world is the world. Then the world is not the world. Or the mountain is the mountain. Then the mountain is not the mountain. Then when the world is the child's view of the world. Everything is just what it is. And then you say, well, it's not something, this is all an illusion. It's all appearances. It's all hypocrisy. The mountain is not a mountain. And then you go through that stage, and then you say the mountain is a mountain. So you come back to where you began in this world, realizing that this world is paradise. When you look back on the journey of conflict, trying to get rid of that rub, the pearl of wisdom is created by the rub, and you realize that everything is as it should be. The world is perfectly as it is, and it can't be any different than it is. And I am okay, and the world is okay. Oh, there's many things to fix. There's many things to do. There's many ways to make a better air conditioner or change poverty or whatever. But underlying all of that is this fundamental awareness or knowing that you are okay, that you and the Father are one, that there's nothing to do, nowhere to go that will make you better than you are right now. And that is the pearl that comes from the struggle to realize that there is no struggle. So you have to struggle, you have to seek in order to discover there's nothing to seek. That's the irony, the blessing and the curse of being human. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.